Hello, and welcome to Doctor Who 50 Years Ago, a show that looks back to the episode that aired in 1970 and looks at the differences between then and now. This week, the Silurians episode 6. It's a bit sobering, this one. I am Ben.
I'm Luke.
And I'm Nick.
And here we are, and here we go, into the news from 1970. Firstly, we're going to talk about Rhodesia. It has declared itself a republic specifically on Monday the 2nd of March, and severed its last tie with the United Kingdom in doing so. 341,000 white citizens are maintaining political power over the 4.5 million non-white residents. We talked about Rhodesia declaring independence in 1967, and here we are again with a final independence push that makes a wobbly African nation.
It's rather interesting that it appears that the government, so Labour at the time, the Labour MPs were more angry about the idea that they declared themselves a republic than the Conservative MPs, which is a bit baffling to a modern observer. The Foreign Secretary was being all upset about it, as were Labour backbenchers. Some Conservative backbenchers are upset about it, but the Conservative frontbench, of which didn't include Douglas Hume because he was away, but you had Reginald Maudling and other Foreign Office spokesmen there. And they didn't say anything, apparently, really. Or, well, Maudling said something, but not much. So they were leaving up to the backbenchers of their party to be, give howls of rage.
Also in the news this week, there's a new pirate radio station, North Sea International, which is found to have transmissions on the medium wave which interfere with marine broadcasts in the North Sea. Luke, you can tell us about the varying political reactions to this.
Why is this important? Well, essentially, in April, the Labour Party decide we're going to start blocking this because Labour are pro-state and therefore pro-state broadcasting. However, Tories are more free market and therefore were at least considered more supportive of the pirates. And as a result, you end up with young rebels who are essentially right-wing, which is opposite of how you would think of it nowadays. You'd think they were more socialist, say.
And look, this sort of plays into the point I was just talking about now, about how things are swapped about, where Labour are more angry about people, a former colony becoming a republic, than the Conservatives are. And of course that seems a bit absurd now that there is a Republican who is still the leader of the Labour Party as we speak in February 2020.
Absolutely. There's a strange shift that's going on here compared to what we would generally think nowadays.
And whilst there's also that point, there's also the point that said Labour Party are still pro-state broadcasters, given that the Conservatives in February 2020 want to make drastic overhauls to the BBC.
Yeah, pretty much. They're looking for more free market stuff nowadays as well, I suppose. It's just a natural conclusion of what people are prioritising at each time.
This week's news dictates a lot about change and non-change. And here's yet another story depicting change and non-change in views from 50 years ago to now. There's a Human Rights Society meeting in Glasgow which attempts to oppose any attempt by MPs to introduce a bill legalising euthanasia. And Nick, you can tell us more about this less than impressed professor of midwifery.
The arguments held in it against euthanasia are pretty much the same that you still get seen now in this last decade that we've had. Well, so what it's talking about is how it's a slippery slope to killing people, and well, there is an argument there. So it's like Scott Muggeridge, and of fame from that video of where he berates the Monty Python people for making Life of Brian, which is one of the best comedy films of all time.
That was him.
Malcolm Muggeridge, yeah, he's in this article, yes.
Oh, I thought it was. I know they definitely had a conversation with a Church of England bishop.
Yeah, they did, and there was Malcolm Muggeridge as well, who was there.
Okay.
Yeah, so here he is about, a decade earlier, also still God-bothering. he does compare it to abortion, and so does a doctor as well. They talk about so this is clearly a pro-life doctor who's upset about the idea of abortion clinics, and he starts linking that to euthanasia, and so they link it to a slippery slope to an authoritarian regime that wants to kill people. But there is still the argument of, so with respect to the abortion thing, there is still a hint of religiousness there that exists now as well. I feel like a lot of the arguments against euthanasia are born from religion.
Specifically Christianity,
yes,
or other Abrahamic offshoots.
Interpretation of Hippocratic oaths, etc., etc. We still have the same debates now. Now, people won't mention the Nazis by name now, which they do in this article, but there is still this idea, that's a slippery slope to a state that will start killing its citizens, blah, blah, blah.
If I may bring out an example, we have literally in this week in which we are recording, a certain number 10 vetting. He was a super forecaster, yes.
Well, this is one of Cummings' weirdos, isn't it?
Yes, but he was talking
the
specifically about
Sabisky
eugenics, and my tenuous link is Nazis.
Yeah, isn't it nice that eugenics, which no one believes anymore, it was credible anyway, and then he immediately brings up eugenicist views. Well, I mean, someone dug them up.
And these views were within the last 5 years and on multiple sites. So.
How did dude who has crazy ideas get hired by number 10?
Yes, it is a very interesting, if tenuous, point that seems to highlight the quote, the more things change, the more they stay the same. And these appear to be true, especially in these news articles from 50 years ago, when you compare and contrast them to what's happening nowadays. That was the news, and now we shall get into the Silurians, episode 6. Hey kids, do you want to see hundreds of people die from an alien virus spreading across locations you recognise? Well, here you go. And we can definitely see here that the appealing to adults aspect of Season 7, because a lot of adults were found to be watching Doctor Who at the end of Season 6, is definitely coming to light. And we're watching the Doctor battle with microscopes and testing for antidotes whilst the world dies around him. Lovely and adult.
What I love here is, this is probably my favourite part about the episode, they've gone overboard on the whole, let's get rid of technobabble and sci-fi that it doesn't relate in, is more like fantasy than actual science fiction. And they've totally gone the opposite route, and they've gone from a very soft to a very hard sci-fi here. The Doctor uses a microscope as a microscope would be used at the time, and he uses lab equipment of the time to, find an antidote. It's not particularly tense drama, let's be honest here, but that's why they intersperse the Brig on the phone shouting at people, because it's got to seem, there's something going on.
There's got to be tension, yeah.
Yeah, but it's great that the Doctor is using real science, and he's not just holding around a magic wand and going, bzz, I've got the answer.
Now I've shrunk myself and I'm going to go into my brain to fight this giant thing that turns into a giant prawn.
Yeah, that wasn't even 10 years after this.
Doctor Who does very well with going between sci-fi fantasy and sci-fi realism. It's almost bipolar.
Well, I absolutely agree. All of the science takes place in a human laboratory with human drugs, and have they said the word TARDIS at all in this serial?
No.
No, they haven't.
So.
He might as well just be man. Man with good immune system.
Eccentric man as well, because he's there bothering the people setting up the equipment. Hurry up, you contractors. I'm going as fast as I can!
The only point where him being an alien is relevant is that's why he's morally superior, because as I said in the last episode, humans and Silurians are mirror images of each other, at least morally speaking.
And he's probably different biological makeup, but again, that's just glossed over, really.
Yeah, so the main thing is he is just a clever man who has strong immune system.
Very down-to-earth Doctor who's going to fight a virus for the next 20 minutes. Why not look at that in more detail? So the dead Major Baker has infected a hospital, and all the doctors, and the nurses too. so it's placed into quarantine by the Brigadier at gunpoint. Yay, military. The Doctor and Liz are on the search for the cure, having been given the bacteria samples by the old Silurian. Even the Doctor's inoculated with antibiotics to ward it off, as he works in the research centre. Everyone's inoculated, except that Dr. Lawrence, because he's denying everything. Oh, and Masters too, because he's already travelled back to London, spreading the infection everywhere. Good luck travelling on British Rail. Liz attempts to be independent, but the Brigadier says, no, you're going to help me man the phones. And I guess because the Brig's handling the crisis, we can pass that over. But it's a nice attempt at feminism.
Liz actually forces the Doctor to have the antibacterials. But she forces him to because he goes, no, it's ridiculous. But he still does it, so... And this isn't the first time in a medical capacity that she has some sort of influence over the Doctor. But I'll come back to that later.
Okay.
The biggest point I had about this scene was, do we still get country hospitals like this? At the very beginning of the episode. This is the second serial in a row where we've had country hospitals. Do we still get them like this?
Well, thanks to Harriet Jones, she introduced new legislation regarding cottage hospitals.
Of course she did. Of course that was a throwaway line in the Christmas Invasion article.
It wasn't no, it was World War III.
Oh, God, of course.
Did you really?
Yeah, no, it's what she keeps saying to the cabinet, and then, who cares what his name, fat guy, says, for God's sake, woman, get some perspective. I'm busy. And we're supposed to hate him because Harriet Jones wants to fight for her cottage hospitals.
I love RTD just slightly more now, because he's obviously talking about this episode, like, he's talking about
the Third Doctor era, I mean, all. And the cottage hospital in Spearhead from Space.
Yes.
That cottage hospitals. I am not calling this episode Cottage Hospital. Brig's ready to fight the Silurians. The Doctor still wants peace, but the brash young Silurian is in charge now, so there's going to be fighting between the Silurians and the humans. Dr. Lawrence is still holding on and being a very obstinate person, annoying Liz for no particular reason. And then Unit and the Silurians have a little fight.
Not neither. It's such a caricature.
Well, I can answer that one. Why I think Dr. Lawrence is such a caricature is because at the end, he snaps under the pressure of his career. This whole time, he's been building and building and building, and it's all he can fixate upon. And eventually, it gets him. He doesn't even notice his health. He doesn't notice anything around him. He shuts out everything except what he's focused on. And that could be a commentary on people who are just so single-minded on their profession to the complete blindness of the reality of the situation.
It definitely trumps my explanation for it, is that you remember the Silurians could induce a mass psychosis in the nuclear reactor, you know, where Dr. Lawrence has been for a quite considerable amount of his years. Do you think he might have just finally snapped? But yeah, it's because he's a career person. He's career-centric.
I think, well, mine works as an out-of-universe explanation. Yours kind of works as an in-universe explanation, I guess.
Yes, I am trapped inside the in-universe box.
Yes. I suspect, yeah, that's probably the intention of Malcolm Hulke, isn't it? That, okay, so the Silurians have brainwashed him or, made him gone crazy, but...
Or at least influenced him slightly.
Yeah, and so, but the real subtext is what you've said, Luke. Probably a fierce criticism of people he knew, middle-class professionals who put their career on a pedestal, and he probably saw that quite a lot being a writer, and his commie brain hated it.
Stop taking my success. Military and government intervention occurs. With the base guarded, and Unit and the Silurians fighting in the caves, the young Silurian looks for an alternative way into the research centre. The plague arrives in London, which is nothing short of genius television, terrifying unsuspecting members of the public, as the cast and crew die left, right and centre. Acting, don't you love it? And Masters dies before he can convey his information about the Silurians to the government.
It's strange to think that there was a time when it was difficult to find somebody, because nowadays there's CCTV everywhere. It's strange to think that the army is this unable to be practical when there's an army person stationed outside our home day and night?
I mean, in the days of police lineups and Shaw Taylor appearing on ATV going, "Can you spot this criminal for us, please? Because we have no information whatsoever."
So it's 50 years hence that the Metropolitan Police started using facial recognition techniques.
And random third-party companies as well.
Well, of course. I mean, everything's privatized in the present, Ben, as well as, I guess.
Quite. The Doctor uses blood samples to test his various palliative cures, and we see the process in painstaking detail, and there's a lot of dead air and no talking, which is a very interesting choice. But so is the line, "Some of these drugs are so new we don't even know their properties yet." There are very many connotations to this. Does medical science work like that?
Maybe probably what it should have said is, some of these drugs are so new we don't even know their effects on humans yet. Because they should have at least tested them on rats at this point. I feel like that's probably the point maybe Malcolm Hulke wanted to get through, but it was perhaps script edited to sound more, "Oh my god, these are so new, we don't know anything about them," sort of thing.
Or a line reading error.
But why does the Doctor say "we"? He's not a human. He knows all this stuff because he's future foreign.
This is back when the Doctor, even though he's a really super clever alien, why would he know about Earth medicine of the 70s?
That or he's already gone native. I mean, the only reason he knows a little bit about medicine is because he studied Lidster.
It's just, I think we've gotten so used to the Doctor becoming omnipotent after this point, basically from Tom Baker onwards, that we're used to him knowing everything, but up to this point, the Doctor isn't omnipotent. He's some alien traveller. He's definitely from the future.
The plot demands him to know.
Well, yeah. So here it demands he doesn't know about human medicine of the 70s, and that.
Yeah, and he is talking to Liz, so probably humouring her as well. Yeah, he's desperately focusing on the task in hand, is that using human medicine to stop an apocalypse. But there you go.
Well, yeah, because if you could just conjure up the cure, then the episode ends here. And there's no drama. There's nothing interesting. So when you talk about the genius television of the railway station,
yep,
this is basically a rehash of the Spearhead from Space, but in a good way. In as much as it's learnt the lesson of that, which is, if you go to a public place that looks like anywhere in Britain, you bring the terror home. So the idea that the plague is spreading through railway stations is pretty terrifying.
Indeed, it's going to cross oceans, but of course this isn't an entirely new thing for Doctor Who, because, the first point of sequel bait, the Dalek invasion of Earth, brings the Dalek to London.
When Masters dies, he dies in front of a block of flats, a modern one, built in the last 10 years from when this was broadcast.
Having infected a girl in a miniskirt on the way.
Yeah, so you were really planted in this. It could happen anywhere nearby you live. That could have been anywhere. To me, it looks like it's by the motorway where they are on the thick of it, episode 1. But there we are.
Of course you would.
That's for you, Luke. Ding.
I liked it.
That could be my flat. That could be where I live right now. That could have happened just outside where I live. It's terrifying.
That's sci-fi realism for you, and it's very good at terrifying the living daylights out of you when you need to be. Time moves on in the episode, and Liz and the Doctor narrow the drugs down, but they're tiring, and the virus is fighting the antibiotics. An infected Dr. Lawrence has a final showdown with the Brigadier, and Peter Miles shows how bloody good and active he is, before Nida finally dies. At last, a cure, and just in time, because the virus is crossing oceans. Probably on a cruise liner called the Diamond Princess. Whilst the cure is being tested on a patient, the Silurians cut their way through a wall and kidnap the Doctor. But I'm not interested in that bit. I'm interested in another line. Shall we comment on the press tapping the Brigadier's phone?
Yeah. In Spearhead from Space, you also have these relentless journalists as well. Why is the press such a strong force in this season so far?
Press are sort of a bit demonized, not in the same way that they're demonized now, but in a sense of where authority, people doff their cap to authority. Authority is actually respected. So these are insolent press people who are because the Brigadier, he's the authority figure here, and he is a really good guy. So the press are actually getting in the way of the really good guy doing things.
I just literally thought that this is really around the point of the explosion of tabloid journalism, and indeed the Brigadier goes, "The Daily what?" And there's certain amounts of newspapers beginning with "The Daily" that we can possibly infer to, and certainly that Australian newspaper baron is definitely going his rounds.
I'm thinking of two. One begins with S and one begins with E.
Yeah.
So, seeing as what the role that the Daily E played let's say, a certain...
But obviously one of them's so left-wing, they might as well have exhumed the bones of Malcolm Hulke.
I'm more thinking about the one that was involved in a certain government scandal in 1963. Liz is the one who suggests the cure, isn't she? The doctor doesn't go, "Well, that's wrong." He does it and then it's right, and he actually then claims credit. So, I mean, man claims credit for woman's work. It's not sort of, doesn't he? Like, that's sort of what happens. Well, Liz goes, "Oh, why don't you try these two strains or whatever?" And then the doctor's like, "Oh, could work." Does it? It makes sense that super clever companion who is Oxbridge educated, capable in all sorts of different fields, knows about this. Makes more sense. Doesn't matter that she's a woman, but it's good that in 1970 it's pretty enlightened to have a realistic woman coming up with solutions, as opposed to a woman from the future. That's a good thing. They showed that with the Patrick Troughton era. And also another point: antibiotics. They work in this.
For the most part, yeah, they slowly die off, but they don't have another inoculation. As we say, that's the palliative. That's the ibuprofen or paracetamol to the actual cure.
And what's funny is, so it mostly works, and so this is long before we really have any worry about how antibacterials will start to fail, because they're starting to fail now. So this sort of virus actually be scarier now.
And to some extent it is, if only because of media exposure.
Yes. And it's wonderful timing that we happen to have COVID-19 raging around the world as we speak.
Yep. Because, of course, we were going to refer to that. Because it's so blooming prevalent, it's impossible not to.
It is in the headlines every day, pretty much.
Yep.
Top story a lot of the days.
Yeah. And here I'm pretty sure I referred to this last episode about how the Chinese Communist government mismanaged it at the beginning, but here we see that as well, not NIDA acts a lot like the Communist Party in China did initially, where they just rejected its existence, and that's what's allowed it to spread from this initial point throughout China, and then because it was throughout the country, it managed to spread outside of the country.
And indeed, Masters acts like other governments in that they allow them to be flown home and potentially carry the risk of infection.
Yeah, because they think, oh, we're above being infected or whatever.
Or they'd rather treat it on their own soil and get the credit.
Exactly. It is quite interesting that this is being very prescient. And we did say this last week, but, it's still extremely relevant now in mid-February, and I doubt it's going to go away, really. This is much worse than swine flu or SARS, the other two. Oh, and Ebola as well.
Yeah. I'm just looking forward to us covering, a launch of a rocket in March, and, the end of the world in June. We can but hope, but we shall see if timelines are so prevalent between 50 years ago and now, as we go on throughout this series of Doctor Who 50 years ago. Thank you very much for listening. You can find us on Blogspot, which redirects to iTunes. You can leave positive comments there because it really helps. You can also find us on Facebook and YouTube, where you can like, comment and subscribe. We shall be back next week with the final episode of the Silurians, where we wonder, where do we store all those explosives? But until then, I've been Ben.
I've been Luke.
And I've been Nick.
Thank you, and goodbye. Bye.